Hello, my name is Nigel Thorne. I'm from Wales, and I have concerns about the influence of queer theory and the deliberate manipulation of discourse that underpins the new RSC code and guidance issued by the Welsh Government and the associated educational materials. On the Cardiff University Sexualities and Gender Research Unit webpage, it states, at one level, gender may seem much more susceptible to definition. It has traditionally been said that while sex is biological, one is male or female, gender is social and cultural. This is the view of sex and gender that parents will have been taught. The paragraph continues. But recent theorists, following Judith Butler and including some of our members, see biological sex and gender as inextricably mixed and both, in some senses at least, culturally constructed and performative. This is the view of sex and gender that children will be taught. Judith Butler is a queer theorist. On the University of Illinois website it states, queer theorists' contention is that there is no set normal, only changing norms that people may or may not fit into, making queer theorists' main challenge to disrupt binaries in hopes that this will destroy difference as well as inequality. As Professor Emma Reynolds from Cardiff University wrote in a book titled Girls, Boys and Junior Sexualities, Exploring Children's Gender and Sexual Relations in the Primary School, queer theory is linked to forms of politics which deliberately seek to break down the fixed boundaries between the hetero-homo, gender and other binaries, to multiply sexual categories and ultimately dissolve them. Reynolds has also stated, the heteronormativity of gender relations in the early years is certainly ripe for some gender trouble. And some of this work is well underway and radically disrupting a range of gender and sexual truths in what might be more fittingly described as the heteroformative years. Butler's view is that gender is performative and that a gender identity is created as a result of performing that gender. In simple terms, we can see three different perspectives regarding gender roles in society. The traditionally socially conservative view is that only boys play with boy toys. The gender critical view is that any child can play with boy toys. The queer theory view is that the child who plays with boy toys is a boy. Queer theory reinforces gender stereotypes. As Victor Madrigal-Borlos states,
gender is not something that is inherent to persons. There is no evidence to that effect. Gender is, in fact, the relationship between the person's free will and the series of stereotypes that assign behaviors or patterns or roles to a particular given sex or to the understanding of sex in a given society.
The queering of the gender binary is most evident in the manufacture of the new identity label, non-binary. The idea was seeded by American academic Judith Butler. It germinated on social media platform Tumblr. It has been propagated by Professor Reynolds, who has recently come out as non-binary, has changed her name to EJ, and uses they, them pronouns. It has been officially recognised by the Welsh Government, and is now to be taught as fact, as a mandatory part of the RSC guidance. In the RSC code, children will be taught that people have an internal gender as well as an external sex from the age of 7. There are over 100 references to the word transgender or trans in the LGBTQ+ action plan. There's no reference to the word safeguarding. Sex, too, is to be queered. In the RSC guidance, sex is defined as being attributed to someone rather than a distinction between male and female as defined in the Oxford English Dictionary. In the agenda resource created by Professor Reynolds, which has already been accessed by thousands of people, sex is defined as being assigned at birth. And in the LGBTQ+ action plan, it implies that there are more than two sexes, where it states, currently, in the UK, only two sexes can be recorded at birth, which excludes intersex people. Trans activist Geoffrey Marsh explains.
Biological sex is fake. Yes, we all know that gender roles are fake, but do not say to a trans person, biologically male, born female, male-bodied. No. There is no biological criteria for gender that is both universal and a binary in human beings. Where does that leave us? Free.
His argument comes from postmodernist philosopher Jacques Derrida. Some believe that this argument is baloney.
Derrida's problem is that he assumes that if there's any marginal cases at all, that the language doesn't work. And Searle's saying, no, that's no problem to us. All of them are fuzzy. So how do you determine where the border is? Well, if you can find a spot between two concepts where you're not quite sure, if you're giving examples that are on the line, it's because you know where the lines are. That the lines admit of some fuzziness or of some disagreement does not mean that there is no center of the concept. The existence of unclear cases does not turn poles into spectrums. And the fact that there are some marginal cases does not mean that there are paradigm cases. And the fact that there are unclear cases does not mean that there are no clear cases.
Yeah, that's right. They think that where there's a fuzzy boundary between concepts, that there's a permeable boundary between concepts. And that's simply not true.
Another word deliberately manipulated is the word queer. Once a pejorative term used to describe same-sex attracted people, the word queer is now regarded by some as inclusive. But the word queer, as defined by queer theory, is problematic because it is defined in opposition to the normal. It is, by definition, exclusive. Hence, it is divisive. And it creates a category of people who can lay claim to being both more interesting and oppressed by the normal. At a meeting of the Senedd Children, Young People and Education Committee in May 2022, Jane Hutt, Minister for Social Justice, stated.
Jane, did you want to come in, Jane?
Yes. Well, thank you very much. Following the minister's his response, powerful response, I was just going to say something about the LGBTQ+ action plan, sort of timelines, etc. But before I do that, I was just reflecting on, school experience, as the minister said. And recently, I met with a comprehensive school in my constituency. Actually, it was the school council, and they said, "Would you come upstairs now and meet our Q&A group?" And I said, "Oh yes, that would be good." And it was the young people had set up a group which was called Queers and Allies, and a Q&A group, and they were actually meeting in the library area, and they had children and young people from all year groups, and it was they changed the way they could all work together and support each other, and it was supported by the school. I think that's quite. I did say I'd invite them in when we have our next update on the LGBTQ+ action plan, but I think you probably will know of some evidence of that kind.
Instead of being concerned that a school was setting up a Queer and Allies group, which will be inherently divisive, Hutt was fully supportive. Children are afraid to speak out about gender identity ideology. In an article for Transgender Trend, a 15-year-old schoolgirl wrote, My generation prides itself on being the most welcoming, liberal and tolerant one yet, but the pretense of tolerance is instantly dropped when alternative viewpoints are brought to the table. At my school, I've seen some of the most rabidly intolerant, frenzied, hostile and dogmatic activists yet, especially when it comes to the topic of gender identity. I'm a 15-year-old girl in a state secondary school, and I've seen this culture of political fanaticism proliferate, where even teachers are afraid to speak against the dogma of the students. In April 2023, ITV aired an uncritical documentary about a young woman with gender dysphoria named Joey, who came out as trans when she was 16.
I fi, mae bod yn traws yn meddwl fi bod yn fy hun heb poeni am beth mae pobl arall yn meddwl ac yn bod yn greiddiol I pwy ydw I tu fewn. Fi'r middle child, felly'n tyfu lan oedd chwarae efo pethau masculine a fel brwydro efo brodyr fi yn rhywbeth really normal I fi. Ond y pethau bach yna, ond nothing, well, oedd yn screamo. I'm trans, ond edrych yn ôl mae llawer o bethau yn neud lot o synwyr. Nes I ddod mas I cwbl o ffrindiau, ddim llawer o bobl. Wedyn, pryd o'n I 16, des I mas I rhieni fi. Nath o ddim dechrau mas yn amazing, ond nawr maen nhw'n really supportive. Nes I ddim bod mor agored ac ydw I nawr. Dwi'n I dal yn ysgol, ond erbyn nawr fel mae enw fi a pronouns fi ar Instagram fi a fi'n really cyfforddus efo just pawb yn gwybod pwy ydw I. My high school was very good with things like that. Like we had digon being like basically the most perfect group that I could have possibly asked for. But I know for a fact that that is not the case in most schools. O blwyddyn 7, o day one, mae digon di bodoli ac di bod yn peth normal. Fi'n meddwl bod yn yr ystafell yma gyda'r grŵp o bobl yn gwneud gymaint o wahaniaeth oherwydd efo'r ystafell yma a'r pobl yma mae'r drysau'r agor a mae unrhyw un sy'n eisiau cerdded mewn yn gallu cerdded mewn.
Fi'n meddwl mae'n bwysig iawn cael cymuned yn yr ysgol ble chi'n gwybod bod chi'n gallu troi lan a teimlo fel bod dim beirniadaeth o gwbl am unrhyw profiadau chi eisiau rhannu neu jyst y ffordd chi'n edrych a'r ffordd chi'n ymddwyn.
Fi'n meddwl eleni dyn ni kind of di cael y cyfle I cario ymlaen y gwaith y tŷ fel start o lan. So dyn ni flwyddyn yma yn trio integreiddio fwy o gwersi, lles a'r rhagenwau yn ogystal â cynnal fwy o gwasanaethau, hyfforddi staff.
While studying at Ysgol Gyfan Plasmawr, Joey was affirmed in her chosen identity. For the Welsh Government, Digon is a flagship group.
I've been visiting Ysgol Gyfan Plasmawr and meeting with Digon, which is the LGBTQ plus peer group, and also Balch, which is the Black Asian minority ethnic peer group. And it's been fantastic hearing them talk about the pupil voice that they have in the school, both in terms of the curriculum, but also the life of the school. From September, we are rolling out our new curriculum, which is inclusive, represents all the communities of Wales, and schools have a real role in providing a safe space for pupils in the way that Digon and Balch have been telling me about today. I'd love to see all schools in Wales having peer support groups in the way that Plasmawr have.
The Department for Education guidance, not replicated in Wales, states materials which suggest that non-conformity to gender stereotypes should be seen as synonymous with having a different gender identity should not be used and should not work with external agencies or organisations that produce such material. While teachers should not suggest to a child that their non-compliance with gender stereotypes means that either their personality or their body is wrong and in need of changing, Teachers should always seek to treat individual students with sympathy and support. The CAS Review's interim report says that evidence does not support an affirmative, non-exploratory and unquestioning approach to children's experiencing gender distress. It also emphasises that social transition is a significant step. It is important to view it as an active intervention because it may have significant effects on the child or young person in terms of their psychological functioning. In May 2021, I wrote to Jeremy Miles requesting he both issue similar guidance to the Department of Education and refrain from referring to children who have gender dysphoria as trans children. The reply stated, "Thank you for your email on the 16th of May addressed to Jeremy Miles, Minister for Education in the Welsh language. I've been asked to reply. Equality is at the core of what we do at Welsh Government. Diversity will always be celebrated and discrimination has no place in Wales. We want every LGBTQ+ person to feel able and safe to live authentically and openly as themselves. Welsh Government strongly advocates the rights of LGBTQ+ people, and as such, we are developing an action plan to strengthen protections for LGBTQ+ people, promote equality for all, and help to coordinate ambitious actions across government and beyond. We will use the LGBTQ+ action plan as a route to consider and develop national transgender guidance for schools. There will be opportunities for LGBTQ+ people and stakeholders, as well as the wider public, to share views on the action plan during the public consultation phase later this summer. In June 2020, an article titled "The Corrosive Impact of Transgender Ideology" by Joanna Williams was published. In the article, Williams discussed the gender identity essentialism of John Money and the queer theory of Judith Butler. The summary of the article stated, "In less than 2 decades, transgender has gone from a term representing individuals and little used outside of specialist communities to signifying a powerful political ideology driving significant social change. At the level of the individual, this shift has occurred through the separation of gender from sex before bringing biology back in via a brain-based sense of gender identity. This return to biology allows for the formation of a distinct identity group, one that can stake a claim to being persecuted and depends upon continual validation, confirmation from an external audience. All critical discussion is a threat to this public validation, and it is often effectively curtailed. However, this is only half the story. The total number of transgender individuals remains tiny. That transgenderism has moved from niche to mainstream tells us more about the rest of society than it does about transgender individuals. People in positions of power within the realms of media, education, academia, police, social work, medicine, law, and local and national government have been prepared to coalesce behind the demands of a tiny transgender community. Previously authoritative institutions now lack confidence in their own ability to lead and look to the transgender community as a victimized group that can act as a source of moral authority. However, this in turn erodes sex-based rights and undermines child protection. The expansion of transgender rights has gone hand in hand with an expansion of state and institutional, both public and private, regulation of speech and behaviour. This highlights a significant difference between today's transgender activists and the gay rights movement of a previous era. Whereas the gay rights movement was about demanding more freedom for the state for people to determine their sex lives, unconstrained by the law, the transgender movement demands the opposite. It calls for recognition and protection from the state in the form of intervention to regulate the behaviour of those outside of the identity group. Whereas in the past, to be radical was to demand greater freedom from the state and institutional authority, today to be radical is to demand restrictions on free expression in the name of preventing offence. Williams lists 5 recommendations, 3 of which are applicable to children. 3. The prescribing of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones to anyone under the age of 18 should be immediately prohibited. 4. No child should be permitted to socially transition at school, i.e. change name, pronouns, uniform, or use the changing rooms and toilets intended for members of the opposite sex without the permission of their parents. 5. Schools should be encouraged to separate out the teaching of lesbian, gay, and bisexual relations from teaching about transgender as part of the relationships and sex education curriculum. Teaching on transgender should not contradict the content of the science biology curriculum. The LGBTQ+ Action Plan for Wales ignores these recommendations. Meanwhile, Joey is committed to a life of medical transition.
Fi wedi bod yn edrych mewn I cael llawdriniaeth top, felly fi'n mynd I gorfod mynd trwy'r NHS oherwydd mae'n proses drud iawn. Fi'n meddwl dyw e ddim yn cael ei weld neu ei drin fel rhywbeth mor serious oherwydd maen nhw'n technically cosmetic surgeries, ond ar gyfer pobl traws dyw e ddim really cosmetic. Mae fe'n treatment ar gyfer gender dysphoria. Mae'n teimlo really anheg actually. Bod e mor fel, mor drud. Mae'n rhywbeth fel, I'm very deeply uncomfortable with the way my body looks. Mae binders yn flatten o'r chest chi, cael e edrych fel flat chest. So fi'n gwisgo un pryd bynnag fi'n mynd mas. Dych chi ddim fod gwisgo nhw am mwy na, fi'n meddwl 5 diwrnod yr wythnos. Mae'n mwy anghyfforddus mynd mas heb un na mynd mas yn gwisgo un a cael e fel, physically hurting. So fi'n mynd I bod ar testosterone, fi'n mynd I cael injections. Ar y pwynt yma, sa'n bothered am wneud fel subtle, slow transition. Fi just eisiau, get it started, get it going. Fi wedi bod yn aros ers yr apwyntiad ges I yn dweud bod nhw'n mynd I rhoi'r prescription I fi. Hwna wedi bod bron 2 mis nawr. So eto, amser eithaf hir I gorfod bod yn aros am prescription. Sa'n credu bod digon o bobl yn gweld e fel rhywbeth mae pobl traws angen. It's life-saving, like medication. Herwydd mae'n rhywbeth sy'n rhan mor fawr ohonoch chi, and when kind of the outside doesn't really match the inside, mae'n cael effaith ar mental health chi mewn ffordd enfawr. Felly mae'n really rhwystredig gorfod aros hyd yn oed yn fwy ar ôl aros am blynyddoedd I just cael y siawns I gallu cael e. Ar hyn o bryd, yr system meddygol ar gyfer pobl traws yng Nghymru, dyw e jyst ddim yn gweithio. Mae'n cymryd gormod o amser, mae'n teimlo fel interrogation weithiau. Ar adegau, mae'n teimlo fel chi'n trio brwydro yn erbyn nhw I gallu cael be chi eisiau ac angen. A dydy hwnna ddim yn deg.
Those parents who would prefer that the Welsh Government didn't attempt to disrupt binaries in the education of school children may wish to support Public Child Protection Wales. Links are included.